Ladies and gentlemen, welcome. Today is Wednesday, February 3rd, and this is Villanova time. We are gearing up for the Villanova Wildcats taking on the St. John's Red Storm live from Queens tonight in a late game airing at 9 p.m. on CBS Sports Network. And we're really excited to have Villanova basketball back. You know, we've had them back for 2 weeks since their COVID pause. We've only seen 3 games in that 2 weeks, and so I think the entire Nova Nation is excited anytime we get to see our guys play, especially this season where they've been a thing of beauty. As always, today we're going to talk a little bit around around the horn at the top of college basketball to start. We're going to talk about what's going on in the Big East since we last saw you on Saturday. We'll get into Nova and what we saw from them on Saturday in their win at Seton Hall. We'll talk a little bit about who this St. John's team is and what to expect from them. And then we'll get into keys from the game and wrap those puppies up as we're bringing you into tip time right at the top of the hour. You know, the first thing I would have to talk about when we talk about a Villanova St. John's matchup, of course, it's a classic Big East matchup. You picture those sort of 80s, early 90s retro unis. In fact, I know Villanova's going with the 70s style jerseys tonight. I definitely wish they were going with the 80s, 90s look. Because as a kid, personally, you know, growing up on Long Island in the 90s and early 2000s, so think Ron Artest, Eric Barkley. Chris Mullins was a little, I would say, before my time, but he's in there too. Growing up on Long Island during that time, though, those Red Storm, like new wave unis, talking like late 90s, early 2000s, they were the hottest item in like the middle school basketball streets. You know, I played basketball in middle school. Most of my friends were really into basketball in middle school and high school. And I feel like everybody had that Red Storm gear. So as a kid growing up on Long Island, you think about the St. John's program fondly because, to be honest, they haven't really been much of a presence really in the new formation of the Big East, but even going back, you know, years and years before that, a tournament run once in a blue moon. And, you know, as a Long Island kid, it's cool to see the Johnnies have a good year. And now I know some of you will say St. John's isn't Long Island, and that's true because they're Queens. If you look at a map, like go to Google Maps right now and pull up a map of Long Island and you look up where Carnesecca Arena is, like it's smack. That's geographic Long Island, baby. I don't care what you tell me, even though it's definitely, you know, it's in Jamaica. So it's definitely for sure Queens. Oh, boy. We'll get into that in a little bit, though. We'll obviously break down the Villanova-St. John's matchup in a moment. Going around the horn at the top of college basketball, Gonzaga, Baylor, and Villanova holding firm in your 1, 2, 3 spots. I think especially after Villanova took care of Seton Hall in the season sweep, you're definitely over the last week or two, and since they've looked good coming out of their COVID pause, you've started to see a little bit more attention to Villanova being in that conversation with Gonzaga and Baylor. You know, a week or two ago, it was, you know, the bottom line on SportsCenter would say, you know, Gonzaga and Baylor remain 1-2. And now it's the last 2 weeks, it's been Gonzaga, Baylor, Villanova will remain 1, 2, 3. So we're creeping up into that conversation in that elite tier. And we very nearly got a Gonzaga-Villanova matchup this weekend. There was a lot of smoke in the Twitter streets last night about a possible Gonzaga-Villanova matchup with Xavier canceling on Nova for Sunday. Gonzaga also having an opening. Xavier, of course, had to cancel due to more COVID issues in their program, very unfortunately. And the rumor mill was flying. We actually had a loyal supporter of Villanova Tip Time who lives in the Seattle area, who I believe has deep in-law ties to the Gonzaga Nation, and he was dreading that possible matchup. I, for one, was excited about it. I think there are those of us that would fear that Nova might get throttled. This Gonzaga team is awesome. Nobody's arguing that. Their strength of schedule before we got into the conference season was out of control good, one of the best in the nation. But, you know, since then, they haven't really played top talent. Since the turn of the calendar year, they haven't played top talent. And so I think that Gonzaga-Villanova matchup would be really good. I think Villanova can absolutely compete with Gonzaga, especially if Villanova brought their sort of best shooting day. So I wouldn't have been super opposed to it. Instead, as Coach Wright was quoted last night, Villanova did field a call from Gonzaga to possibly play a game this weekend. Villanova's commitment, though, is to the Big East and especially making up games that had been previously postponed. So instead, drum roll please, we'll be playing Georgetown on Sunday, which is kind of a funny sort of tale of two sides of the college basketball coin. Georgetown obviously gave us a run for our money in the first half of our game earlier this year. In the first leg of this matchup, they actually had a surprise win against Providence on Saturday. So that's not to say that Georgetown is incapable of winning this game on Sunday, but mentally going into a game against Georgetown versus Gonzaga, a little bit different. Baylor held it down nicely last night by beating number 6 ranked Texas, sort of handedly in the end, to be honest. I was watching the game and, coming out of halftime, it was, Texas was able to, I want to say, tie the game and even take a small lead, maybe like a couple minutes into the second half. And then from then on, there was actually a sort of a dumb technical foul all around. Sort of dumb that it is a technical foul, but also dumb that the guy did it on a nice Texas dunk. And from then on, it was pretty much over. Like it was like almost blink of an eye. Baylor was up 10, and they pretty much just ran away with it from there. So definitely, had a test early, but it ended up handling Texas. And again, one of the most impressive things to me about Baylor is the Big 12 is just stacked. But we'll get into that more on that in a moment. In a win that looked really nice for Nova, Virginia Tech the only loss on Villanova's schedule. Currently ranked 20th in the nation, beat number 8 Virginia in a nice ACC matchup. And again, Virginia Tech sort of ran away with that one, wasn't really close in the end. We discussed a little bit on Saturday's show how Oklahoma had scored back-to-back top 10 wins and was likely going to catapult themselves in the ranking from 24 where they were. And we were absolutely correct as they vaulted to number 9, only then to turn around and lose on Monday to number 13, Texas Tech. So as I was saying a moment ago with Baylor, the Big 12 is a lot of fun this year. A lot of good teams, which only makes that Baylor showing at the top, undefeated still, all the more impressive. And to round out sort of our musings around the top 25, worth calling out that number 18 Tennessee beat up number 15 Kansas pretty good in the Big 12 SEC showdown on Saturday. And then Tennessee subsequently jumped to number 11 in the rankings, only to then turn around and lose against an unranked Ole Miss team last night, where Tennessee only scored 50 points. Woof. So college basketball in fine form as we get into this beautiful month of February. You know what February is, 1 month before March. So excited to see college basketball peaking early, and we know we have a really fun 60 or so days ahead. So getting into the Big East a little bit, most of the action in the Big East since I saw you last is going to be concentrated to Saturday, where Nova notched the win at Seton Hall, which we'll talk about in a minute. Creighton, number 17, needed all 40 minutes to beat DePaul in Chicago, which is a little bit surprising. But DePaul, even though they're in the basement of the Big East, they're scrappy and they've looked decent at times. So, it's no knock on Creighton that they needed the whole game to win. Like I said earlier, Georgetown pulled the upset on Providence, which deals a pretty bad blow to the Friars' bubble hopes, as I believe they're currently ranked in sort of the next 4 out category. So last 4 out and then next 4 out after that. And that would be after the Georgetown loss. So I think it knocks them out of like the next 4 out category. And then Xavier handled Butler pretty good on Saturday before getting hit with another COVID pause, unfortunately. So again, leading to the postponement of Sunday's game, which was supposed to be between Xavier and Villanova. And then as sort of a segue into tonight's action, St. John's played on Sunday, actually, so less than 72 hours ago, beating Marquette in a tight one in Milwaukee, avenging an earlier loss where Marquette had won the first leg of the matchup. So a really nice win for the Johnnies, who have now won 4 in a row. And before we get into breaking down St. John's, we're going to talk a little bit about where we last left you with Villanova. Quick time check. We are 11 minutes short of game time on CBS Sports Network, and I'm actually going to put a pin in the color commentary to talk a little bit about CBS Sports Network for a second, because every year we always forget how poor CBS's digital strategy is and how difficult it is for the cord cutters to watch the game on CBS Sports Network. And it's always like a mad dash right around tip-off to figure out how the heck am I going to watch this game. So if you have cable and you have CBS Sports Network, have no fear. Just turn the channel on, no problem. But if you're a cord cutter like me, you have two options. Number one, go do a free trial of CBS All Access and use the CBS Sports app. And then you can, of course, cancel that free trial right after the game. Option two is if you are so lucky to have, this is the unofficial option, you didn't hear it from me, sort of on the QT, on the down low. If you do have a friend or a relative who has a cable subscriber login, you can log into CBS Sports Network on a web browser and watch the game there. Less than ideal, especially for those that like to stream to our TVs, because there's always sort of a weird lag with that. So those are your options. Now back to our regularly scheduled programming and where we last left Nova at Seton Hall in what I would classify as a perfectly throttled 40 minutes of hashtag road attitude from the Villanova Wildcats. You know, I'll admit I myself was guilty of sort of complaining in the 2 minutes leading into halftime and then a few times during the second half, sort of complaining about, you know, really wanting to see Villanova close and go for the jugular. You know, with 2 minutes left in the first half, I think they got out to like a 15, 16-point lead, and then they just like stopped playing basketball for 2 minutes and went into halftime with only a 10-point lead. And it was like, man, you really want to see this team like kind of work on that closeout gene, right? This was the complaint of a fan that has very little to complain about with this team. This is a really good Villanova team, especially because I think the Seton Hall team is definitely a tournament caliber team. Their season was on the line. They didn't play great, but they didn't play bad. And this game was just like a little bit out of reach the whole time. For the Seton Hall fan, this game must have been torture because the whole time they were close enough that there was hope, but that it was so obvious from whistle to whistle that who the better team was, even if it wasn't either team's best day. Weird comparison and possibly completely out of bounds, but it almost felt like if you remember the 2009 Final Four game against UNC, right? We were riding so high coming off of that Elite Eight win over Pitt. It was a night I'll never forget. But that Final Four game against UNC, who went on to win that 2009 championship, was exactly that, where like the whole game we were down between like 8 and 12 points. And the whole time it was like a so close, but so far you never really felt like you were in it. And that's really the number one thing I remember about that game. I don't really remember anything else other than just feeling like that the whole time. And after the Seton Hall game, I was sort of reflecting on that and sort of feeling a parallel between the games. But hey, leave it to me to compare a 2009 Final Four matchup to an obscure January random Big East game. So, as discussed on Villanova Tips Time on Saturday's program before the game, Jeremiah Robinson Earl was big time due for a big time game, and he had one. We liked him to have a breakout game, if only because I didn't think it was going to be really possible for a player of his caliber to have subpar games against the same opponent, especially 10 days apart. You know, barring any sort of injury or weird issue, I just didn't really think that was possible from him. And he had 23 points and 5 rebounds, and he only played half the game. Why did he only play half the game? Because he was in foul trouble. And we're going to gloss over that and not knock him for that, because it was pretty masterful, the fact that he could put up the stat sheet he did in only half the time. And per what I was saying earlier, where like you do wish sometimes Nova would sort of have that go for the jugular gene at times a little stronger than they do. I think a large reason why they were never really quite able to like blow the doors off in the second half was because Jeremiah Robinson Earl was the hottest player in the game and he was sitting for most of the second half. I think that's a perfect segue into who our second star of the game was, because it was the other obvious impact player in Justin Moore, who dazzled with 16 points, 5 rebounds, and I think most important to call out from the stat sheet was he was 4 of 5 from deep. It just felt like every time he touched the ball, it was going through the hoop. And, you know, Villanova fans have to love seeing this guy continue to extend his peak as the season gets deeper. You heard comparisons from him earlier in the season to players like Josh Hart. If you see him continue to play at this level night in and night out, he's going to be getting a lot more attention come tourney time, which is fantastic for him and for all of us by association. The last thing I want to call out in the last game is Villanova's defense. I feel like it had multiple personalities a little bit against Seton Hall. At times, it was like lockdown tenacious. And there were certainly a couple times where we got to continue shouting out the Brandon Slater tenacity trend, where he was just coming up huge on the defensive side. He's just awesome to watch on defense. But then there were also, I would say, an above average number of times where Seton Hall had a super open look or a super open like mismatched drive to the basket for an easy layup on some sort of an obvious breakdown, a missed switch off on defense or otherwise. And I think, honestly, this is, I would say, more of a reason for optimism than anything, because, again, it was a late January game, early February game. You're seeing those glimmers of that very tenacious defense. And then the mistakes are all things that hopefully get worked out by, studying tape and continuing to get more reps as we get deeper into the season. So you have to if this team plays at their full defensive capability, I think they're going to be able to match up with just about any team in the country. So looking at the clock, we've got about 4 minutes left until tip-off. And, we want to talk about this St. John's team who is surging lately. They've won 4 straight and 5 out of 6. Their 4 straight wins were at Marquette in sort of going backwards from most recent and back. At Marquette, at DePaul, against Utah Valley at home, and at UConn. Were their 4 straight wins. And it's worth noting that UConn was indeed ranked when they played, so that's a ranked W. Otherwise, the strength of schedule, even though St. John's is passing the eye test right about now, the strength of schedule here is definitely helping them out. I wouldn't be me if I didn't point that out. So you can call that out as far as maybe just trying to hype up the game, the matchup being a little closer than it is. But you also don't want to, discount these guys, disqualify these guys in any way, because if you look at sort of the top players on their lineup, starting with Julian Champagny, he's leading the Big East in scoring. Also, you pronounce his name Champagny. I had to look that up to make sure I didn't fudge it, and then all of you make fun of me via text message afterwards. But he is not only leading the Big East in scoring, but he's like one of those bigger ball handling guards that uses that mismatch to drive the lane and get buckets. Another name I'm going to call out for you to pay attention to is Posh Alexander, who's picking up steam in the Big East Freshman of the Year category. He's been playing great as of late. And interesting to note that there are 4 St. John's players averaging double digits, and all of them are guards. The thing to pay attention to, and you're going to hear multiple times tonight, is quote unquote 40 minutes of hell, which is a term that Coach Mike Anderson, St. John's coach, whose team is playing him into the Big East Coach of the Year combo right now. But this 40 minutes of hell style of play is something that he's trying to build sort of the program identity around. And I captured a quote from vuhoops.com, which, again, if you don't read their pregame breakdown before every game, you should be. If you're watching this show, I guarantee you'll enjoy that content. But they quoted them as calling this 40 minutes of hell as a, quote, fast-paced style of play, using their athleticism and quickness to cause mayhem all over the floor. So St. John's scores a lot of points. I think they're somewhere in the top 40 in terms of overall scoring offense in the country, which is great. But they play pretty weak defense overall, which is something Villanova can exploit. But again, to speak to the testament of this sort of culture of quote-unquote mayhem, as Coach Mike Anderson calls it, they are one of the best. St. John's is one of the best teams in the country in stealing the ball. They average just shy of 10 steals per game. So something to keep in mind, that this is a total pace matchup tonight. Who is going to be able to exert their will more than the other? Villanova, as one of the most controlled teams in the country, even though they're ranked very well on offense, overall offensive marks and offensive efficiency, they keep their number of possessions very low, and they also don't turn the ball over much at all. They're one of the best teams in the country as far as like turnovers to possession ratios. So you got Villanova over here, who plays a very controlled, very calculated sort of offensive style, and then you've got this run and gun, quote, mayhem style of St. John's. Both teams know what the other is bringing to the table. And so it'll be interesting to see, how coaches have prepared both teams for the game to combat the other. So a couple things to look at. I think Jeremiah Robinson-Earl, hoping for him to have a back-to-back big game on the stat sheet, also because it's a favorable matchup for him. Again, because of this sort of mayhem style full court press, he's going to get a lot of open looks in like broken transitions, meaning transitions where they've been able to beat the press early. He's going to get a lot of looks. And then against a smaller guard heavy lineup, he's going to get a lot of mismatches and set offenses as well. So can he take advantage of that? I think he can. So look for him as sort of a key player in the game. And then, you look at Caleb Daniels, again, coming back, hasn't been much of a factor, had some fouls, had a nice game before last game sort of trailed off a little bit. But you look at Colin Gillespie, Jermaine Samuels, Justin Moore, Caleb Daniels, and any one of those guys is liable to go off on a given night. So if we can get two of those guys to perform, we can get Jeremiah Robinson-Earl to have an average game. You really like the Cats to have an edge in this one, as long as they can, take care of the ball and hit shots at a decent clip. But that's not necessarily rocket science. What it is now, though, is tip time. So, ladies and gentlemen, this is where I'm going to leave you. Flip over to CBS Sports Network with whatever fancy gadget you have and whatever way you're able to. And let's buckle up for a good old-fashioned Big East slugfest here. Have a happy Wednesday, and we'll see you soon.